So I wanted to introduce you all to a basic idea of what we try to do here at Islamic Learning Foundation. One thing that you guys, I hope, the students saw demonstrated throughout the class is basically the culture that we're trying to create. We're trying to create a culture that is not one of just you come to study for yourself and you go home and call it a day. But rather we wanted to create a culture that was a supportive culture, a community of students. If you look at our, mission, and our objectives, one of the fundamental objectives of Islamic Learning Foundation is creating a community of students. And this is very, very important, whether it was our orthographic jokes or our opportunities to just we had a midterm dinner as well, just like we have this final dinner. We had a midterm dinner. We had occasionally, we had our own WhatsApp group where people were able to engage and help one another. And for me, that was very fulfilling, alhamdulillah, as well. And that's the culture that we want to create in Islamic Learning Foundation. We don't want just to build an institution of Islamic learning, which is absolutely critical and important. But we recognize that that learning is essential for that knowledge that we learn, that we grow together as a jama'ah, as a community, as a group of Muslimin, of believers. And that is the culture that we're trying to create. And I pray that this was like the initiation of that as we move forward with a lot of our programs. Sheikh Yusuf Rios, he, just to introduce you to him, he was in the monastery studying to be a monk of the Catholic faith. And during that period, he converted to Islam. And alhamdulillah, his vigor of religious learning and leadership took him and motivated him to continue with his Islamic studies. And so he studied at Islamic American University in Detroit, Michigan. And he was able to go and study in Egypt as well for a number of years with some of the greatest scholars in Egypt, with an emphasis on hadith and fiqh and usul al-fiqh. So Imam Yusuf Rios, we were so excited for him to join us because the vision that we have, that culture that we're trying to create, he saw eye to eye with that, and he sees eye to eye with that, and it's it's demonstrated with the fact that he brought his family here. We want to create a family and a community of students who want to learn and grow together in their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Sheikh Yusuf if he's done eeting, inshallah.
Okay, I actually wanted to share a story in brief. A lot of people don't know this, but Arif and I, we have a relationship which goes back many, many years. Basically how we met was that we were actually studying Arabic in Egypt together. And it's funny how sometimes you don't know the qadr of Allah, how it unfolds. Because one of the things that I think is fundamental, and again, it's not an issue of praising, but it's the issue of, continuity, is the whole idea of taking knowledge and communicating and building at the same time, right? And that's alhamdulillah, with the whole concept of ILF trying to maintain itself as a project throughout the years, and this generation coming in and contributing back is something that's very important. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the Arabic language. First of all, within the philosophy of ILF and just a movement overall in general, there's this concept of revival. There's this concept of tajdeed, meaning to return something back to what it was because it's not broken. Something, returning things back to their foundations. And so the Arabic language, without a doubt, serves as the most important vehicle after an attachment to the Quran and Sunnah, having a relationship with Allah, is the most important vehicle to revive the deen. Mahmoud Shakir, who was a scholar in Al-Azhar al-Sharif, he was the brother of Ahmed Shakir, who became known for reviving hadith sciences in Al-Azhar. He went to Al-Azhar to study, and he encountered within the Dar al-Ulum system people like Najib Mahfouz. Najib Mahfouz is known for his Arabic and so on and so forth. But he had basically came up with an idea about the Prophet that was pretty much problematic. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's basically, the Prophet was just being painted as like this genius type leader, that type of thing, right? There was kind of like this subtle separation between prophethood and just like this genius leader who moved his people. And so that began within Egypt massive debates, because within the Arabic studies departments, this is where all the fikr began to change. Like when we think about how a lot of the thinking changed in the Muslim world, it began through the Arabic studies departments. And eventually it came to a point where people began to have doubt in the deen. Because a lot of the, when you have somebody that is dealing with the Arabic language and they have mastery, it's like the guy who is really awesome at the nasheed. And when you put the nasheed singer along with the so-called dry sheikh, who wins out at the end of the day, the one who's able to move the emotion and speak to the intellect and so on and so forth. And so that's what you had in that time period, that the Arabic studies departments, they were appealing to the people. Storytelling, you know what I'm saying? It was an issue of drawing you in through these amazing stories and these ideas that are, talking about progress and so on and so forth. So Mahmoud Shakir, he decided to retreat. Imagine, this is within the heart of Al-Azhar. He decided to retreat from Al-Azhar and he went on his own journey. And under the tutelage of his brother, his whole family was a family of knowledge. Mahmoud Shakir began to say that the most important thing in revival, he wrote a pamphlet, it's called Risalatu ila Thaqafatina, is the treatise to the way of our culture and our civilization. And so basically he started to talk about the importance of the Arabic language. So he started going back and talk about what is the function of the Arabic language? What is, basically what constitutes Islamic poetry in the Arabic language, or an Islamic story, right? You talked about Urtugul people, that's the whole concept, that's part of the game. What constitutes Islamic culture? Is it the Muslim hijabi, sporting the burkini in the way that it just came out? Yeah, we know that there's hijab and this and that, but does it constitute, the spirit of the culture of Islam? So the language itself communicates a lot of ideas. And that was one of the things that Ahmed Shakir wanted to say, that, in that journey that the Muslims went through after the fall of the Khilafah, one of the last frontiers was the attack on the language. And it didn't only come with just a basic attack. It came also with a whole slew of other ideas. You could be speaking the Arabic language, right, and using the Arabic language, but it may not necessarily be for the purpose of Islam. But we know that it was because of Islam, the Quran, that's why the Arabic language was preserved. The Arabic language would have died if it wasn't for the Quran. The Quran, it was primarily revealed in Lugat al-Quraysh, the primary modality of speaking among the tribe of Quraysh, but all of the other lugat or lahajat, the other forms of speaking the Arabic from different tribes, they were preserved because what they meant to understand the language of Quraysh, which is the language of revelation. When we talk about Islam not being distorted, the Quran not being distorted, is because of the proximity to the language. You can actually do a 2-year course and have some basic contact with the language. Not very big contact, but you have contact. You have a relationship with the Quran, right? It's different than if you have to study for 20,000 years, which is almost impossible, to try to understand the Bible. You're talking about studying Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, and all forms and dialects that are dead. The Arabic language is still alive and living. And so Mahmoud Shakir, he basically told us that if we're ever going to talk about revival, it comes back to the issue of the Arabic language. And the second point is that because the Arabic language is preserved by the Quran itself, this is not an issue of Arab nationalism, which came in afterwards. So there's always that issue of identity, that those of us who necessarily don't come from those Arabic speaking tribes that we work through. right? So that's part of the deal. The other thing that comes to the fore is that what's one of the primary issues that we confront? Those of you who deal with Christianity or whatever, what is one of the things that we say about the Bible? What do we say about the Bible?
It's been changed.
It's been changed. But why do we say it's been changed?
It's not preserved in its original language.
It's not preserved in its original language. What about if it was in its original language and it was written in it? No, I'm messing with you. But yeah, it's not preserved in its original language, right? So, no offense, but is a translation equivalent to the original? What's going on with the translations of the Quran?
Different.
If we equate the translation of the Quran to the Quran, aren't we beginning to fall into the same problem? When you have the majority of the ummah that has been put into a situation in which we're distant from the Arabic language, we can go down that route easily. That's why we have to attach the issue to the point of reviving the deen. Colonialism, that was one of the most important attacks. To separate the Muslim community from the Arabic language, that's a means to understand revelation itself. That's one of the number one things that they did. And so what happened? You have the Egyptian can't understand the Moroccan can't understand the Saudi, right? Even no offense, but there was a big debate when Pakistan was formed. What's the national language? You know, the Somalis are considered Arabic speaking peoples because they're, you know, the issue with the Arabic language. But in reality, they're a tribe that is not of Arabic origin. The whole issue of who's an Arab, who's not an Arab, the issue is if is an Arab based on the Arabic language or not. We come into issues of identity, we come into issues of understanding, right? The text, all of that stuff comes into the Arabic language. The colonial powers, what they did was made sure that the slang, because that's what it is, the slang of the Egyptians, the slang of the Saudis, the slang of the Moroccans became languages. So they're studied like languages. And then they codified, you know, basically standard Arabic, they call it. And they say, well, this is standard Arabic. No, there's Fusha, and there's something that's not Fusha, right? There's clear Arabic, and that's which is not clear Arabic. So the Muslim community is in that position right now where the Muslim Ummah overall, we're in the jam where the Arabic language is not what's spoken. You go to Dubai. How many of you have been to Dubai? What's the language?
Urdu.
Aside from Urdu, what's the language?
English.
Huh?
English.
English. And so when you start looking at the way that Arabic is taught, it's considered very difficult. Because of economic reasons, the youth are French, English, whatever's going to get me out of my situation economically, which is understandable. But if we continue like this in another 100 years, the Quran will be something that's on a shelf and not readable. And this is one of the reasons why, for instance, Maulana Maududi wrote books like the Four Concepts to trace back the way that words change. The way that words change and how they change and how they distort our understanding of the Quran in practice. You know, and he's not the only one, but that's the reality at the end of the day, that we have to understand that when it comes to just the basics of practicing the deen, the Arabic language is extremely important in that regard. And so whoever makes a sacrifice in that regard to continue, and it is a sacrifice, the reward is great. And I'll close on this note. I'm not a born Muslim, as you know. And I remember, it's funny because we're going into Ramadan. I remember coming into Ramadan, because I took Shahada in Ramadan. And I remember coming into Ramadan and standing in Taraweeh. Now imagine if you're a person that converted to Islam, you're coming in Ramadan, you have all these rules. What's going on in Taraweeh?
Exhausted.
Aside from exhausted.
A language you don't know. It's being recited.
Standing for 2 hours.
Yes, they're standing for 2 hours. The only thing, you're just vibing with whatever hits your heart. And it does. You can, something, it's weird because it is true that people talk about that experience, that somehow the Quran speaks to you. And I'm not talking about like mystical, made up stuff, but somehow it does hit your heart. But at the same time, where's your mind? Where's your mind? Your mind is somewhere else. You know, it's different than, and that's the difference sometimes between a qari that comes in and he stops on the note and he comes back and he recites the ayah of the Quran and he intones the ayah in a certain way. And then you're like, everybody like, after 2 seconds is boohoo crying. And you're like, why didn't I feel that? You know what I'm saying? You know, why am I not boohoo crying? And that's in part because of that understanding of what the ayah means. So the tadabbur of the Quran, the contemplation of the Quran will never really come to us 100% without some understanding of its meanings. It's already hard. Like, you know, we can understand Surah Al-Fatiha, we can understand some of the Quran, but really getting to that point where there's that, we feel that is Allah speaking to us. You know what I'm saying? That's removing so many layers. That's the importance of the Arabic language. That's worth setting aside a year of your life. That's worth the sacrifice. That's worth even paying $100,000 for it. You know what I'm saying? It's worth whatever's in the dunya because of that relationship with Allah and your deen. It's worth it. And I'll tell you that even in the struggle to continue to work with the Arabic language, and the issue of mastery becomes a lifelong journey. But I'll tell you, there's a big difference between being in a tarawih where you're just sitting there like, mashallah, and you're listening and you're like, let me wake up. What did Allah just say there? You know, does that apply to me? You know, it's a whole different reality. But the study of the Arabic language is tied into the issue of revival, protection of the deen, proper understanding and how to practice, and ultimately, you know, a connection, you know, with the Quran itself. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم والحمد لله رب العالمين.